Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that the idea of betrayal felt impossible? The kind of trust that's built not just on love, but on years of shared dreams, loyalty, and the belief that you were building something greater together. What if one day you returned home to find that trust, quietly, methodically, had been turned against you? My name is Hank Aaron. I'm not talking about baseball today, not the home runs, not the trophies. Today, I'm talking about something far more personal. For most of my life, I believed the legacy my father left, the land, the family home, our name, was sacred. I thought I was protecting it by living with integrity, coaching the next generation, and honoring the sacrifices that came before me. But while I was away coaching youth teams overseas, someone I loved was rewriting that legacy behind my back. She did it with a smile, with legal paperwork, with charm and calculation. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed me to be gone long enough. This is not a story about revenge. It's about clarity, resilience, and the quiet storm that rises when a man decides he's had enough. I returned to Georgia in late October, a month earlier than planned. My final coaching contract in Tokyo had wrapped early after a sudden funding cut, and something inside me said it was time to go home. Maybe it was my mother's voice in our last call, slightly slower, a bit unsure, or maybe it was just the quiet sense that something wasn't right. The moment I stepped through the door of the house my father built with his own hands, I knew time had shifted. Things looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. The autumn light poured through the living room windows, casting long shadows on the hardwood floors. My mother's favorite armchair was in its usual corner, but her knitting basket lay untouched. Dust had gathered around the baseboards. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed under the weight of silence. The walls held photos of my father in uniform, of me rounding third base in Milwaukee, of family barbecues on Sunday afternoons. But the house had lost its soul. I found the documents on the second morning, tucked into a drawer in my father's old desk right below the box where he used to keep his cufflinks. The folder was thick and marked with post-it notes in neat handwriting that didn't belong to my mother. Inside were legal documents, some old, some new. I unfolded the top page and froze. My name was still there, Hank Aaron Jr., son of Henry Aaron Sr., but something was wrong. The title of the document read, Revised Aaron Family Living Trust. I blinked, reading again. The primary trustee had been changed. My wife, Tasha Aaron, was now listed as the one with full decision-making authority over the estate. My mother, who had always been the designated trustee after my father passed, was now marked as a secondary beneficiary. I flipped through the rest of the packet, a knot tightening in my chest with each page. The trust had been completely restructured. Language about property transfers, medical power of attorney, and even a clause about real estate asset optimization. I had coached hundreds of games, flown thousands of miles, and spent my life honoring the name I carried. But in my own home, something sacred had been quietly dismantled. I sat at that desk for nearly an hour, not moving, not even breathing deeply, just reading the fine print again and again. My father's legacy wasn't about money, it was about memory. The land we lived on spanned 16 acres just outside of Atlanta, next to the high school baseball field he once mowed by hand. That land was where I'd learned to throw, where we'd scattered his ashes beneath the oak trees, and where I had promised my mother, without speaking, that I would keep everything safe. That night, I didn't confront Tasha. Not yet. She greeted me at the door with a practiced smile and kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. She said she'd kept everything in order while I was gone. The taxes, the bills, even the old generator I never got around to fixing. She poured me a glass of wine and asked about Japan, about the kids I'd coached, about whether I'd missed her. I told her I had. I lied. Later, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling fan turning in slow, steady circles. I thought about my father, how he never yelled, never raised a hand. He led with presence, with purpose, with silence when it mattered most. And I realized in that moment, This wasn't going to be a conversation. This was going to be a game of endurance, and I've never lost a game I played with my whole heart. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains like nothing had changed, but everything had. Tasha moved around the kitchen in her usual rhythm, brewing coffee, slicing fruit, humming a tune she always claimed reminded her of our honeymoon in Charleston. Her robe was silk, deep red, and I noticed for the first time a gold watch on her wrist. Not just any watch. A Cartier, sleek and precise. I hadn't seen it before. It didn't match the story we told people about being simple, grounded, grateful. It was a gift, she said casually when she caught me looking. From the firm, year-end bonus. She sipped her coffee and smiled, but her smile never reached her eyes. I nodded and said nothing. I didn't want to start anything. Not yet. My father used to say that a man who speaks too early in the game shows his weakness. Watch, wait, read the pitch. That morning I read everything, her energy, her language, her eyes. And what I saw behind the surface was strategy. Polite, polished, practiced strategy. That day I went room by room through the house while Tasha was at work. I wasn't snooping, I was searching, for my own clarity. There were new files in the cabinet, all labeled in the same handwriting I'd seen on the trust amendments. Health insurance records, bank printouts, even brochures from upscale assisted living facilities in Atlanta. The name Oakbridge Manor appeared more than once, circled in pen. My mother was in her bedroom when I knocked. She was watching an old Western on TV, her eyes soft with nostalgia. "Mama," I said gently, "how are you feeling lately?" She looked at me for a long second, then smiled faintly. "Oh, baby, I'm fine. Just tired sometimes." I sat next to her and held her hand. "Do you remember signing some legal papers a few months back? About the house? The land?" She blinked, confused. "Papers? Tasha brings me so many things. Bills, documents. She says it's to keep things running smoothly while you're away." I didn't push. I just listened. The more I looked, the more the picture came into focus. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It had been built over time, brick by brick. Tasha had slowly positioned herself as the pillar, paying bills, managing my mother's prescriptions, fielding calls from contractors. What looked like kindness now felt like a campaign. She knew I was away most of the year. She knew my mother had started forgetting names, days, even where she'd left her keys. And she'd filled in the gaps, graciously, seamlessly, until everyone believed she was the one holding the family together. But what shook me the most wasn't her manipulation. It was how easily I'd let it happen. We'd met 10 years ago at a charity gala in Atlanta. I was fresh into retirement, working as a consultant for a sports foundation. She was elegant, sharp-tongued, magnetic. Tasha was the kind of woman who lit up a room without saying a word. I was drawn to her the way moths flirt with fire, dangerous, beautiful, hypnotic. Within a year, we were married. She handled our wedding with the precision of a campaign manager and insisted we write our own vows. "We're not just husband and wife," she'd said that night. "We're partners." She had no real interest in baseball, but she admired the symbolism, the legacy, the discipline, the glory. And more than once over the years, she'd hinted that the land my family owned was untapped potential. "Why not build something there?" she'd asked. "An athletic complex, a high-end training camp. You could coach, mentor, grow. Something big." I always said no. That land was sacred ground. But now I could see. She hadn't stopped dreaming. She just started moving quietly in the direction I refused to go. That night, she cooked dinner, grilled salmon with asparagus, and red wine. She talked about her firm expanding, how they'd offered her a senior position, how we could finally think about scaling our life. I smiled and asked polite questions, playing the role of a man still in the dark. When she spoke about how things were getting too much for my mother and maybe it was time for next steps, I only nodded. Later, while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling again. But this time, I wasn't thinking about confusion. I was thinking about proof. I needed more than suspicion. I needed evidence. Dates, signatures, transfers, paper trails. I had spent most of my adult life learning to read pitchers, managers, even the wind inside a stadium. Now I would learn to read deception in silence, because the difference between a game and a war is simple. In a game, you shake hands at the end. In a war, you walk away knowing what was taken and what you're about to take back. 2 days later, I took Mama to lunch, just the two of us. I told Tasha I wanted to show her the new batting cages that had opened near Decatur, and she seemed unbothered. "Drive safe," she said, kissing me on the cheek, sliding her sunglasses into place like a woman who had already planned the rest of her day. I nodded, but my focus was already elsewhere. We didn't go to the batting cages. We went to Sable's Diner, a place off the main road where Mama used to take me after Little League games. The booths were cracked and the waitress still called her Miss Lucille like it was 1985. We sat in a corner seat under a dusty photo of Dr. King shaking hands with a high school baseball team. When the waitress left with our order, chicken salad for her, black coffee for me, I leaned in. "Mama," I said softly, "I want to ask you something important, and I need you to be honest with me, even if it's hard." She looked at me with kind eyes that had grown thinner, softer, more distant with time. "Of course, baby. Do you remember signing any legal documents? Papers about the house, the trust, anything like that?" Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water. "Tasha brings me things to sign sometimes," she said. "She says it's all standard. Bills, medical forms, insurance, bank things. I trust her." I kept my face still. "Do you remember anything with the title Aaron Family Trust?" She frowned. "Maybe. That sounds familiar. She said it would make things easier for you, that you'd approved it from overseas." "She told you that?" Mama nodded slowly. "She said you were busy and that this would keep the taxes low, that you didn't want to be bothered." The knot in my chest tightened. Not only had Tasha rewritten the trust, she'd done it under the illusion that it was my idea, that it was coming from me. My mother's confusion wasn't incompetence, it was misdirection. Someone had carefully orchestrated this narrative, so she wouldn't question a thing. She looked down at her napkin. "Did I do something wrong, Hank?" "No, Mama." I reached over and took her hand. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were just trying to help." On the drive home, while Mama slept in the passenger seat, I made a call to an old teammate of mine, Curtis Johnson, a catcher with a law degree and a sharp mind for elder care litigation. He picked up on the third ring. "Curtis," I said, keeping my voice low, "I've got a situation. I need you." After I explained everything, he went quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Don't confront her yet. Let's get the timeline straight first. You need documentation, signatures, bank records. Give me a week. I'll loop in a forensic accountant I trust." 3 days later, I found the first stack of evidence, not because I was looking for it, but because Mama brought it up. We were going through old photos in her bedroom when she said, "Oh, did I show you the bank statement Tasha brought me? She said the investments are doing better." My heart stalled. "What investments?" "In the folder," she said, pointing to her nightstand. I opened the drawer and found a navy blue folder with a logo I didn't recognize, Silver Horizon Financial Group. Inside were statements from 3 different accounts. 2 were joint accounts, newly opened, with both Mama's and Tasha's names. The third was a brokerage account that nearly made me drop the papers. It held the long-term family investments, bonds, pensions, equity portfolios that my father had carefully built over decades. And they had been moved. Completely. Transferred to this new brokerage, then divided across multiple new assets. The most recent withdrawals totaled $68,000, drawn in chunks of $5,000 to $10,000 each. The withdrawal forms all bore my mother's name, but I knew that signature. I had seen it 1,000 times on birthday cards, church donation slips, school papers. And this version was different. Shaky, inconsistent, uneven. It wasn't her handwriting. Not really. Not anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, The papers fanned out around me like evidence from a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it was. Slow, calculated financial manipulation. Not theft in the middle of the night. Not a gun or a crowbar. Just a pen. And enough distance to make it seem legal. When Mama looked over at me and asked gently, "Are the numbers good, baby?" I smiled and said yes. I kissed her forehead and folded the papers back into the folder like they were nothing more than utility bills. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tasha came to bed late, smelling like wine, and spearmint, her heels clicking down the hall like she wasn't sneaking anything at all. She slid under the covers beside me and whispered, "You okay?" "Just tired," I murmured. "Getting used to being home again." She curled against me like always, like everything was fine, like the ground beneath us wasn't already cracked, open. But I knew then, I had enough to keep digging, enough to act. The next pitch was coming, and I wasn't going to miss. The next morning, I sat alone in the garage, the one place in the house that hadn't been touched. Dust clung to the old workbench, and the scent of oil and pine reminded me of my father's presence, solid, silent, always watching. I laid the documents out across the wooden table, slowly organizing them. Trust amendments, bank statements, account registrations. The dates all lined up. The first change to the trust? Signed 4 months into my contract in Tokyo. The joint accounts? Opened weeks later. The brokerage transfer? 3 days after Mama had a minor fall, one Tasha never told me about. I called Curtis again. "She's been setting this up for a long time," I told him. "She's smart," he replied, "but she got greedy. That's where most of them slip." He advised me to get the trust and financial documents reviewed by a neutral estate attorney, someone who wasn't a friend, someone a judge would listen to. I drove to Macon the next day to meet with a man named Royce Delaney. Gray suit, steely gaze, no nonsense. He flipped through the trust amendment, then looked at me. "This isn't just aggressive," he said. "It's opportunistic. Based on your mother's age and cognitive state, we could argue undue influence, especially if we prove she didn't fully understand what she was signing. Can we prove that? Depends. Has she been evaluated by a specialist? Not yet." Royce leaned forward. "Then that's your next step. You need a geriatrician's medical opinion. If she's showing signs of early dementia now, we can build the case that those symptoms were already present at the time of the trust change." That same afternoon, I booked an appointment with Dr. Adrienne Holtz, a highly respected cognitive specialist. I didn't tell Tasha. I told her Mama wanted to check her blood pressure. That was enough to keep her out of it. Dr. Holtz ran a series of tests: verbal memory, number recall, simple orientation questions. Mama struggled through them, smiling through confusion, apologizing as if it were her fault. By the end of the session, Dr. Holtz looked at me gently. "She's showing signs of early-stage Alzheimer's. Based on her patterns and history, I'd estimate it began developing at least a year ago, possibly earlier." My stomach dropped. I thanked her, took the report, and drove home in silence. This wasn't just about stolen money anymore. This was about a woman who had trusted us, who had trusted her, being used, manipulated, reprogrammed by the one person I should have been able to rely on. But the storm wasn't done forming. That night, after Mama went to bed, I asked Tasha if she'd ever thought about investing in development. Her eyes lit up like matches. "Well," she said carefully, "some ideas have come up. Nothing official, just discussions." "Like what?" She sipped her wine. "There's a sports developer, local guy. He's been asking about the land, thinks it could be a great site for an elite baseball academy." I nearly choked on my drink. "Really?" "It'd be your name, Hank," she said, reaching for my hand. "Your brand. You could train the next generation right here. Leave a real legacy." I thought I already had. She laughed lightly. "You know what I mean. Physical. Scalable." I nodded slowly. I wasn't surprised anymore. She had always been about vision, about climbing, about things you could build. I just hadn't realized that to her, people were part of the infrastructure. The next day, I dug deeper. Curtis's forensic accountant sent over a flagged transaction, a wire transfer from one of the joint accounts to AL Holdings LLC. I searched the registry. Aaron Legacy Holdings. Registered to 1 Tasha Donovan Aaron. The address listed wasn't ours. It was a unit in a high-rise condominium downtown. I drove there, stood across the street, watched from my car as she exited the building 2 hours later in a black pantsuit, heels sharp as nails. She didn't see me. She was laughing with a man in a charcoal suit. He touched her arm. She didn't flinch. I stayed there long enough to know it wasn't an affair. It was something colder, more calculating. Back home, I went through her files again while she was at the gym. I found the paperwork, lease agreements, business cards, receipts for catered meetings, and a client roster that included private investors, zoning officials, and 2 major real estate developers. At the bottom of the folder, folded twice and stained with a coffee ring, was a printed email chain. The subject line read, Proposed Acquisition, 14.7 acres. Subject Elder, Lucille Aaron. It listed the property value, potential use cases, and projected displacement window. Displacement. That's what they called it. That night, Tasha asked if I wanted to take a walk. I said I was tired. She kissed my cheek and went without me. I sat in the dark, my hands resting on the file folder, like they were holding something alive. The betrayal was now complete. Not a suspicion, not a shadow, but a full-fledged operation. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had targeted my mother, erased my father, and repackaged our family name into a commercial pitch. But she'd made one mistake. She forgot who I was. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the den with the lights off, the file folder in my lap, listening to the soft creaks of the house settling, the sound of distant cars passing. My father's photo stared down at me from the mantel, him in his Braves uniform, mid-swing, the same pose they used when they named the local park after him. I used to think strength was about speed and power, but in that moment I realized it was about stillness, about knowing when not to swing, about standing in the box and waiting for the perfect pitch. And mine was coming. The next morning, I quietly moved my things from the master bedroom into the guest room. Tasha noticed, of course. Sleeping separately now? She asked, arching one eyebrow over her espresso. Jet lag, I muttered. I've been thrashing a lot in my sleep. She nodded slowly, a knowing smirk flickering at the edge of her lips. Whatever helps you rest. What I didn't tell her was that I'd also changed the passwords on all our shared accounts. I placed a freeze on my credit and ordered a full credit report under my mother's name. 2 inquiries had been made in the past month, one from a private nursing home and one from a luxury retirement community called Fairstone Heights. Both had my mother listed as the applicant. Neither had ever spoken to me. Later that afternoon, while Tasha was at her firm's leadership retreat, I drove to Fairstone. The building was pristine, white stone and glass, with a lobby that looked more like a hotel than a care facility. I spoke with the director, who confirmed the application had been submitted and partially funded with a $25,000 deposit. I blinked. $25,000? Yes, the director said, checking his computer. The client of record was Mrs. Tasha Donovan Aaron. Payment was made via wire transfer from a brokerage account. Do you have a copy of the application? He printed it for me. My mother's signature was at the bottom, slightly off, shaky but passable. The date was just 2 weeks prior. 3 lines down, the box labeled responsible party had been signed. Tasha D. Aaron. When I asked how much of the deposit was applied, he frowned. Actually, it looks like only $8,000 reached our account. The rest? I'm not sure. That night I called Curtis. I've got the application. I've got the deposit discrepancy. And I've got a feeling the rest of that money didn't vanish. It was rerouted. He didn't even pause. We're filing tomorrow. Emergency motion, guardianship, financial injunction, and asset freeze. Think. It's enough? Curtis chuckled grimly. Hank, this isn't just enough. This is a grand slam. We filed everything within 24 hours. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator, Lamar Hill, a retired federal fraud analyst with a specialty in asset tracing. Within days, Lamar delivered a report thicker than the Braves yearbook. Tasha had been meeting regularly with a local luxury home builder. They were designing a custom estate on private, newly available land just outside Atlanta. The site? My father's land. Our family land. She'd also leased a Porsche Cayenne under her maiden name and funneled payments through Aaron Legacy Holdings. She hosted vision dinners at a country club under the guise of launching a youth sports nonprofit, except the nonprofit had no EIN, no board, and no actual programs. She wasn't planning to build a legacy. She was planning to sell it. The final blow came when Lamar sent me a single image, a photograph taken from across the street near her office downtown. Tasha stood under a marble awning in a crisp white blazer, speaking with a man I recognized immediately, Douglas Bellamy, a well-known zoning commissioner with a history of cozying up to developers. In her hand, she held a thin black folder. Later that night, as we sat at dinner, she brought up the idea again. "I've been thinking," she said casually, spearing a piece of roasted beet. "Mama Lucille really needs better care. She's just not herself these days. And it's not fair to expect you to put your coaching work on hold." I didn't respond right away. I chewed slowly, wiped my mouth, then looked her in the eye. "What's your plan?" I asked, voice level. She leaned forward, excited. "Fairstone has a spot. I already paid the deposit. It's near my office, so I could check on her often. You could focus on your work, and we could finally build that facility we talked about." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate how much you've done," I said. "Truly. But I think we should pause a bit, just explore other options." She sighed, annoyed. "Hank, you know how hard these places are to get into. The deposit is non-refundable after Friday." "You made a deposit already?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Of course," she said, touching my wrist. "Good places have waiting lists. I used her account, not ours. Don't worry." I smiled, just enough to keep the calm. What I didn't say was that I'd already seen the records. I knew only a third of the money reached the facility. I knew where the rest went. I knew who she'd been meeting with. And I knew what was coming. The next pitch was already in the air, and this time I wasn't just going to hit it, I was going to clear the fences. The motion was filed on a Tuesday. By Friday morning, Tasha was served at a charity breakfast held in the atrium of the Georgia Heritage Museum. I didn't go. I didn't need to see her face when the envelope hit her hand. According to Lamar, who observed from a discreet corner table, she didn't say a word. Just read the first page, then the second, then stood up and left, her chair scraping loudly across the marble floor. She didn't even finish her speech about ethical wealth building. That afternoon, the silence at home was heavy. Tasha barely spoke during dinner. Her fork clicked against the plate with mechanical detachment. I could feel her calculating. A woman like her always had contingencies, but this time she hadn't expected me to be one of them. The hearing was set for Monday morning, downtown Atlanta. I arrived with Curtis and Royce, both in dark suits, briefcases in hand. Mama came with me, dressed in a lavender blouse and soft gray sweater, her favorite. Her eyes wandered and she held my hand the whole way in, but when I asked her if she was okay, she whispered, "As long as you're next to me, baby, I'm just fine." Tasha showed up 10 minutes before the session, flanked by 2 attorneys from her firm, both polished, both visibly rattled. She didn't look at me, not once. The courtroom was quiet. The judge, Honorable Maria Langston, was in her early 60s, stern, dignified, no nonsense, the kind of woman who had likely seen every form of human greed imaginable and had long lost patience for excuses. She opened the hearing without ceremony. "This is a preliminary motion to determine the legal and ethical validity of amendments made to the Aaron Family Trust, to evaluate allegations of undue influence and financial abuse, and to assess the mental competency of Lucille Aaron at the time of signature." Curtis stood first. He spoke calmly, clearly, with the precision of a man who knew every line of evidence by heart. He laid out the timeline. My deployment, the trust amendment, The suspicious account activity. He presented statements from the forensic accountant showing clear withdrawal patterns, mismatched signatures, and deposits routed through a personal LLC. Then came Dr. Holtz. She took the stand and calmly explained my mother's diagnosis, her diminished short-term memory, and how these symptoms had likely begun before the trust was altered. She would have had difficulty fully understanding or remembering the implications of the documents she was asked to sign, she said. Tasha's lawyer objected. Speculation, he said. But Judge Langston held up a hand. I'll allow it. The doctor has established a medical basis. Continue. The next witness was Lamar. He presented photos, receipts, and records linking Tasha to the Porsche, the downtown condo, and the land development proposal submitted to the Zoning Commission just 3 weeks prior. He ended with the photograph of her and Commissioner Bellamy in the folder marked Aaron Land Project. Then Royce brought out the final blow. The printouts of Tasha's correspondence regarding the assisted living application, emails discussing displacement timelines, forged financial forms, and the recorded call to Fairstone, during which Tasha confirmed that Lucille Aaron is no longer mentally capable of handling her own affairs, and yet only days after that call, she had her sign a contract transferring primary control of the family trust. The courtroom was still. Even Tasha's lawyers were quiet now. Tasha took the stand reluctantly. She wore a navy blazer, no jewelry, minimal makeup, a calculated effort to appear humble, composed. She spoke of sacrifice, of love, of how she had stepped in when no one else would. She needed me, she said, voice trembling. Hank was gone for most of the year. Someone had to manage the estate. Someone had to protect the family's future. Was your future part of that? Curtis asked gently. The Porsche, the downtown condo, the luxury retreat booked under the trust's name? She hesitated. Those were part of the image. For clients, for credibility. And was credibility also the reason you applied to place Lucille Aaron in an assisted living facility, without her knowledge or consent? Her jaw tightened. I did what I thought was best. Curtis paused. For whom? Judge Langston folded her hands. I've heard enough. She turned toward the bench, looking at each of us with measured eyes. This court finds that Lucille Aaron was not of sound mind at the time she signed the trust amendment. Furthermore, the court finds credible evidence of financial misconduct, undue influence, and ethical breach on the part of Tasha Donovan Aaron. The trust will be reverted to its original form, with Hank Aaron Jr. and Lucille Aaron listed as co-trustees. All joint accounts are to be frozen and reviewed under a forensic audit. Additionally, I am forwarding this case to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal investigation under elder abuse and fiduciary fraud statutes. There was no applause, no shouting, just the sound of Tasha inhaling, sharply as the words hit her. Her posture didn't break, she didn't cry, but her hands resting on the table began to tremble. When court adjourned, I helped Mama to her feet. She looked at me, eyes a little clearer now, and said, I'm proud of you, baby. Your father would be too. Outside, the sky had turned gray, thick with early spring mist. Tasha walked past me without speaking, her heels tapping across the concrete. One of her lawyers asked if she wanted a ride. She didn't answer. She just kept walking, the sound fading behind us. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the storm lifting. Justice hadn't been loud. It had been deliberate, steady, silent, like my father's swing in the bottom of the ninth. Clean, precise, and impossible to undo. In the weeks that followed, I moved Mama into the small guest house on our property, the one my father built with his own hands back when he still believed his family's story would never be rewritten by strangers. With the funds recovered from the trust and the frozen accounts, we hired a full-time nurse. Not a facility. Not some polished brochure promising 5-star care. Just peace. Just home. Tasha didn't contest the divorce. She packed 2 suitcases and left Atlanta without a word. Last I heard, she was living out west under her maiden name. The downtown condo lease was forfeited. The Porsche was repossessed. The dream she tried to sell was gone before it was built. As for me, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt something deeper, clarity. There's a kind of justice that doesn't roar. It moves slowly, patiently, with the steady hand of a man who knows exactly what he's protecting. Not revenge, not pride, just legacy. My father used to say, "Your name is only as strong as the silence you're willing to hold before you speak." Now I finally understand what he meant. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to be reminded. Legacies are defended not with noise but with wisdom, and sometimes silence is the loudest answer.